next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. The government rushes to change firearm laws to avoid making criminals out of usually law-abiding gun owners. Just a few tablespoons of a stolen vet drug could kill a cow. Now police fear the thieves don't know exactly what they've got. Sexist or not, the school uniform policy that lets girls wear earrings but not boys. Rationing our drug dollars. Should children get priority when it comes to funded cancer meds ahead of all other conditions and ages? And the countdown's on to the Rugby World Cup semi-final double header. And don't forget, you can check us out, Sky Channel 83, Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, good afternoon. I'm Karen McCarthy. The government will ensure gun owners don't get caught out in a predicted backlog of licence applications. It's amending the Arms Act so firearms owners with an expired 10-year licence aren't penalised while their new licence is being processed. Our political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
The licensing cycle that's been in place since 1992 means there are peaks in applications every 10 years with no staggered approach. The Police Minister, Chris Hipkins, says there is often a significant hold-up as applications are processed, meaning responsible firearms owners are unable to comply with the law through no fault of their own. More stringent assessment processes have also contributed to the backlog. The amendment bill will ensure if a licence holder applies for a new one before its expiry, it will remain in place until they're told of their application's outcome. The bill will be introduced on Tuesday.
Firefighters are calling on their bosses to up their pay offer on the back of the government's promise of extra money to help settle their long-running employment dispute. The Professional Firefighters Union called off their strike action today after the government's confidential offer. Its National Secretary, Watty Watson, says, however, it won't be enough by itself to resolve all their grievances.
Every day, things is rolling the dice. Every day we have trucks and stations offline because there are not enough firefighters. And every day we have trucks break down on the way to incidents or at the incident.
Watty Watson says firefighters believe if they don't make a stand, then nothing will change. In Canterbury, firefighters have kept the Pegasus fire north of Christchurch contained despite more windy weather. They say it could take another 3 days to extinguish the fire, which has burned through 200 hectares of pine forest and scrub along the coast. The wind is expected to die down shortly and 2 crews will monitor the fire overnight. More than 50 firefighters and a helicopter will be back working on hotspots tomorrow. Twitter has told its 7,500 employees they will hear shortly whether they still have a job. The email sent to staff warned the social media giant will go through the difficult process of reducing its global workforce. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, completed the purchase of Twitter just over a week ago. Soon after, he fired its chief executive officer and other top officers, and more executives have left the company since. Air New Zealand's chief executive says the company's goal for its first carbon zero flight in 2026 is the right way forward for aviation. Today, the airline announced its plans to replace its smallest regional fleet with 23 emissions-free aircraft by 2030. Greg Foran says the future of flying is changing.
We know this is the direction of travel. We know it's the right thing to do. This is a big challenge. Not just for Air New Zealand, it's for airlines generally, but we want to be to the forefront of this. We think it's the right thing for us and we think it's the right thing for the country.
Air New Zealand is still deciding on what carbon-free model it uses to power the planes, with hydrogen, electric and hybrid models being tested. More than 20,000 tickets are still available for tomorrow's Rugby World Cup semi-finals at Eden Park, with just under half the stadium seats sold. The double-header will see Canada take on the highly favoured England on Saturday afternoon, before the Black Ferns take on France at 7:30. Tournament director Michelle Hooper says it's a big crowd for a semi-final.
4 weeks ago, when the world record was 20,000 for a Rugby World Cup match, we reset the benchmark with 34,000 plus at the opening match day. So to have 20,000 secured already for a semi-final, great opportunity for walk-ups. and beautiful weather, it's really a dream scenario.
Michelle Hooper says they are on track to meet their goal of having 120,000 people attend the Rugby World Cup tournament. It's 5:04. In other sport, Ireland pace bowler Joshua Little says they're confident they can beat the Black Caps in their T20 World Cup game in Adelaide. While Ireland are unable to make the semis, New Zealand must win to confirm a playoff spot. After beating both England and the West Indies earlier in the tournament, Little says they know they can beat anyone.
If you just look at the tournament so far, you've seen upsets nearly every day or every second day, if you can even call them upsets anymore. I mean, we had a couple of good games against them during the summer back home in Ireland. But there's no reason why another upset couldn't be caused.
The match has just started with New Zealand batting first. Josh Burnett is in line to be the first Southlander to win the Tour of the South in 26 years after grabbing the Tour leader's yellow jersey on the penultimate day of racing. The 22-year-old Burnett has an 8-second lead after finishing 6th on the 151-kilometre 6th stage from Invercargill to Gore. The stage was won by Auckland's Oliver Grave. Football World Governing Body FIFA has told all 32 teams competing at the upcoming World Cup in Qatar it's time to focus on football. Qatar has been criticised for its stance on same-sex relationships, its human rights record and its treatment of migrant workers, with many players and teams involved in protests. Kenya's first Olympic medalist, Wilson Kiprugut, has died at the age of 84. Kiprugut finished third behind New Zealand's Peter Snell in the 800 metres at the 1964 Tokyo Games. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, playing favourites with Bob Dylan. Well, sort of. His biographer, music historian Clinton Halen, looks at Dylan's new, typically eccentric book of other people's songs. The BBC's Catty Kay takes us to a few of the crucial states in the midterm elections in the United States, and David Farrier, who went down a rabbit hole for his latest documentary and finds he cannot get out. Call Kim Hillaho. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
On air, online and on demand. Lisa Owen next with Checkpoint after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday, and it's an updated one. For Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mostly fine apart from isolated showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow afternoon with showers developing about the ranges. Horowhenua to Wellington, Wairarapa and Nelson. Fine but cloudy periods for Wellington and Wairarapa from tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, becoming cloudy, isolated showers tomorrow. Buller and Westland, occasional showers, some briefly heavy, clearing to fine tomorrow morning in Westland and tomorrow afternoon for Buller. Otago, partly cloudy with isolated showers this afternoon and evening, mainly fine tomorrow. Fiordland and Southland, cloudy periods, showers retreating to the coast in the morning. Westerly gales about the south coast and Stewart Island easing tonight. And the Chatham Islands, mainly fine but becoming cloudy tomorrow evening. It's 5:07.
Nā mihi Karen, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government's rushing through changes to firearms laws that will stop gun owners potentially being criminalised while they wait months in the queue for licence renewals. The changes will mean as long as someone applies to renew their gun licence while the current one is still valid, they'll legally be able to keep and use their firearms after that licence expires and until their application is decided. About 9,000 applications are backed up and already 2,000 licences have expired while people wait for new ones to be processed, meaning they can't keep or use guns in their own right. Joining us now is Grant Dodson from the Game Animal Council. Kia ora, Grant.
Kia ora.
This sounds messy, is it?
Yeah, look, it's been a building problem for some time, and look, we really appreciate Minister Hipkins responding to this in this way. So the Game Animal Council has been lobbying both the Minister of Police and also the police themselves to address this issue, and yeah, really pleased to get a positive outcome.
But it sounds like things are in a bit of a pickle, even though you managed to get this change. 9,000 people in the queue, 2,000 people with expired licences, even though they've made applications. How are people dealing with that? What do? Offload their guns?
Yeah, they do. Look, it's a really significant issue, and I've been impacted, or my family's been impacted by this personally. With my wife is a firearms licence holder, and it's taken her, I think, over a year to get hers processed, which is all done now. But look, the key issue is that at the moment, if your gun licence expires, then you are no longer a licensed person, and that means that you have to surrender your firearms either to the police, or in many cases to a friend or associate who has a licence and also a safe place to store them. So this change is really important because if you're a passionate shooter, or perhaps you're a farmer, or you're someone who's involved with pest control, you might be a commercial operator. Once that licence expires, then you're out of business until such time as it's been processed. And with delays for administrative reasons, law-abiding people are getting harmed. So it's really good to see the government moving on this change, and it can't come soon enough.
Grant, do you know people stuck between a rock and a hard place who maybe are farmers or need to be able to use a gun for their work, who are left kind of lagging in this queue?
Oh, look, in amongst those 9,000 people, I think there's been numerous people who have been significantly impacted in terms of recreation and some in terms of commerce. So yeah, it's a real issue.
So why has it got so bad? Why is there a pile up now?
Yeah, so there's two reasons really. Firstly, in 1992, New Zealand ceased to have lifetime firearms licences and moved to a 10-year licence. So there was a whole lot of licensing done in 1992, relicensing every 10 years since, and obviously we're in 2022. So it's not surprising that there's somewhat of a pile-up now. But that's been compounded with the new firearms laws and I suppose the change process to develop the working parts of those laws and the regulations and actually get people out there doing their relicensing. So we've got a double whammy this year, which is making it significantly worse than normal.
I see the Minister is acknowledging that it's going to get worse before it gets better. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, that's true. And look, what I'd really urge the Parliament to do is to treat this with the urgency that it deserves and to pass this through Parliament quickly. It can take some time to get laws through Parliament, and this needs to be addressed under urgency because it'll be impacting many people around New Zealand, and whether you're just
people criminalised, Grant. In the meantime, if they've got nowhere to send their guns and they need them for part of their work, potentially are there people who are being criminalised by this on paper?
Yes, potentially there are. Yeah, yep, absolutely. There's about 2,000 of them at the moment, and if they continue to use or possess their firearms once they're expired due to administrative errors, they are effectively criminalised, and that's not fair if you're a law-abiding, responsible firearms owner.
There is a downside to this, and I just want to know what you think of it, which means if someone is no longer fit to hold a licence, right, their circumstances might have changed, might have done something else, whatever. If they're not any longer fit to hold a firearms licence, they're going to get a free pass until the application is processed, right? Which could go for months. And you could have people having firearms and access to them, legally able to use them. You said your wife waited a year for her licence to be renewed. As it drags on, and potentially they may no longer be fit to have that licence.
Yeah, look, I think that's really addressed in other parts of the legislation. There's lots of law in there that enables police to effectively pick out people who are misbehaving or using firearms illegally and cancel their licence, confiscate their firearms, put them through the court process. So I think if anyone's acting poorly or illegally, then the mechanism is there for their legal ownership of firearms to end immediately. And I would like to think that if that's happening, then the police would act, and it is going to be done before the licence is renewed. It's going to be done on the spot. So, I'm not of the view that will be a significant issue at all.
So this legislation will solve the problem of criminalising people while they wait, but what more needs to happen to speed up the 9,000 people's applications in the queue?
Yeah, so look, the Game Animal Council has been talking directly with police on this, and also to the Minister. So the police are recruiting as we speak to build an enhanced firearms unit to administer the new firearms laws. And, they're actively working on this issue. But it does take time to get people on board in a tight labour market, and it does take time to get them trained and get the systems working. So, I think the Minister's quite right to say the issue will get a bit worse before it gets better. And, we're very keen to see this legislative response enacted as soon as it can be.
Thanks so much for your time, Grant. That's Grant Dodson, who's from the New Zealand Game Animal Council. Interested in your thoughts on that one. Are you waiting for a licence renewal? How long have you been waiting for in the queue? There's 9,000 of you out there. Do get in touch, 2101 on text. It is almost 5:15. Kia amo tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Alarmed at the prospect of professional firefighters going on strike with Guy Fawkes looming, the government has stepped into their long-running industrial dispute. However, firefighters are warning the government top-up isn't enough and burning issues remain. And as Canterbury firefighters clean up in the aftermath of a massive blaze north of Christchurch, a government minister has suggested it could be time for public discussion on the public sale of fireworks. Ruth Hill reports.
Business is booming at Lemon Plastic Fireworks in Porirua, where you can blow hundreds of dollars on massive packs of coloured gunpowder labelled Armageddon, The Beast and Asylum. Martin, who's a pyrotechnician the rest of the year, says, however, most people only want one thing.
Sparklers, sparklers, sparklers always sell out.
He says it's safety first.
We hand out safety pamphlets with them. We explain what they do. We definitely don't encourage anything that's going to be harmful. They're very tame fireworks now compared to anything before.
On the streets of Wellington, there's more ambivalence about Guy Fawkes.
Fireworks are fine, it's the idiots using them that's the issue.
There's two sides, right? There's the animals and then there's the people doing stupid things, but they're also kind of fun.
Public displays are alright because that's all controlled and maintained.
Fireworks at Matariki is awesome. I think fireworks for Bonfire Night, Guy Fawkes Night, whatever you call it, in New Zealand, I think, no, it's gone past.
Internal Affairs Minister Jan Tinetti was horrified to learn that the blaze at Pegasus Bay this week, which forced the evacuation of 130 people and consumed more than 200 hectares of forest, was sparked by fireworks.
Especially as we're moving into a time where climate change is having a much bigger impact on the fires that we're seeing at this point in time. I think those are discussions that we need to have as a country.
Ms Tinetti says the reason the government has offered to put extra money into fire and emergency to help settle the long-running industrial dispute with firefighters is because it's concerned about New Zealanders' safety. She won't say how much money is on offer, as she doesn't want to compromise ongoing negotiations. But it's not enough, according to the Professional Firefighters Union. National Secretary Watty Watson says fire and emergency hasn't increased its pay offer by 1 cent since an independent report last month found firefighters were significantly underpaid and overworked.
They've increased the administration and HQ staff numbers threefold, and yet we still have firefighter numbers back at 1990 levels.
Watty Watson says strike action is their last resort.
Yes, we are fighting for decent wages. The firefighters are making a stand because if we don't now, nothing will change.
Fire and Emergency Chief Executive Kerry Gregory says Fire and Emergency remains committed to exploring all the options available to reach settlement, and is confident the new offer represents considerable progress. The union says it's not withdrawing its strike action for Monday until Fire and Emergency agrees to meet next week with the decision makers in the room.
Ruth Hill reporting there. Do let us know your thoughts on restricting fireworks. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Also, a little later on the program, we're going to talk to a mother who's trying to get school uniform rules changed. Girls can wear studs, earrings in their ears, but not boys. Is that fair? Or should both girls and boys be allowed to wear earrings to school? Let us know your thoughts on that one and why. Text us on 2101 and tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Tourism operators in Rotorua are firmly against the idea of some motels remaining as emergency housing accommodation for another 5 years. Resource consent is being sought for that, and if granted, would apply to 13 motels in the city. Rotorua's reputation as a tourism mecca has taken a hit over the pandemic, but operators are optimistic this summer could provide a step towards normality. Our reporter Tom Taylor and Marika Habazi have the story.
Planning a stay in Rotorua, the condition of your motel may be up in the air. Of the 67 motels listed on the Tourism Board's website, 46 are operating as emergency housing, or with a mixed model of both emergency and visitor accommodation. Rotorua NZ Chief Executive Andrew Wilson says it's been a rough time.
We've seen the visitor feedback from those properties that are trying to mix visitors with people that are in emergency or transitional or long-term housing, and it's not ideal. I don't think that it's actually ideal for the people that are actually living in those properties either to have visitors coming through, so it's not a great mix.
Mr Wilson says amid an increase in antisocial behaviour and petty crime, his organisation's primary concern is making sure visitors stay safe this summer. That includes looking at the future of emergency housing, with a lot resting on the outcome of consents for 13 motels, which could see them used as emergency housing for the next 5 years.
From our perspective, 5 years is a hell of a long time, and when you're looking at what the impact of some of this reputational damage has been, and you start to multiply that out over 5 years, you start to get into some pretty eye-wateringly large numbers.
We head to Hell's Gate Mud Spa, where operations manager Paul Rayner says the state of Rotorua's emergency housing threatens the city's reputation as a tourist destination.
Manaakitanga is like I ake your mana and you ake my mana, so it's like bringing up that mana together. Now I see us showing a lot of manaakitanga to people staying in those motels in town here, but I don't see a lot of it coming back. So from my point of view, I think that we need to stop it, and 5 years is just far too long.
Mr Rayner says the pandemic has brought tough times for most tourism operators, but he chooses to view it as an opportunity for improvement.
It was the perfect kick up the butt we needed, mate. Like, this business is running so much more effectively now, and we've really sort of focused on our team, focused on our staff, and focused on the culture of the business. We run a much more efficient business now. We're much more profitable than we were beforehand. The business has completely changed.
Pre-pandemic, downhill giant inflatable ball rolling attraction Zorb had about 30,000 visitors passing through each year. Owner Andrew Akers says that figure dropped by about half in the past couple of years, but hopes things are on the up. After 2.5 years of limited repairs and maintenance on site, the company's now playing catch-up to get everything spick and span for summer. But Mr Akers says they're not pulling out all the stops just yet.
The big unknown is if anything else happens on the COVID front, really. At the moment, the New Zealand dollar is fairly low, which means that people are if they're internationals travelling here, their money goes a little bit further, which is great for us. But on the other side, airfares are high, so we just don't know.
Despite their concerns for the city's future, Rotorua business owners are predicting a busy summer and recommending that visitors book activities well in advance to avoid disappointment. With that in mind, we decided to return to Zorb's slopes and get ahead of the queues.
Here we go.
Here I go, sloshing around inside the nucleus of an inflatable plastic ball down Zorb's steepest and fastest 300-metre track.
Well, it's been a tough couple of years for Rotorua tourism businesses, but you can be sure they'll be trying to get the ball rolling ahead of summer. Time for me to get out of here.
That was our reporter Tom Taylor. If you are listening on radio, do check out the video on the website, filmed by Marika Habazi. It is worth a watch. I don't know if I'd be keen to be stuffed in a plastic ball and rolled down a hill, but apparently Tom was. 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaro, do send us your feedback. Lots to talk about this evening. Fireworks, love or hate them. Let us know your views. 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Also, school uniform codes coming up in the program. Should boys and girls both be able to wear earrings to school? Let us know your thoughts on that one and why. Our email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Karen is standing by with the headlines. Ko Karen, anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. The government is making a law change so firearms owners with an expired licence aren't penalised when applying for a new one, ahead of a predicted peak in applications. The police minister says the licensing cycle means there are peaks in applications every 10 years. About 9,000 applications are currently backed up. Grant Dodson from the Game Animal Council told Checkpoint he wants Parliament to treat the matter with the urgency it deserves. The Internal Affairs Minister Jan Tinetti has signalled it may be time to consider whether fireworks should continue to be available for public sale as the threat from wildfires continues to grow. She said she was horrified to learn that the blaze at Pegasus Bay in Canterbury this week, which destroyed more than 200 hectares of forest, was sparked by fireworks. The authority which governs Auckland's Maunga says it's pleased with the overwhelming support from Aucklanders for its efforts to protect them during the Guy Fawkes season. Multiple maunga across Tāmaki Makaurau are closed each evening until Sunday as a fire prevention measure. Fireworks were the cause of large fires on both Maungarei Mount Wellington and Maungawhau Mount Eden in 2019 and 2020. Auckland's mayor says a director on the board of Auckland Transport has done the right thing by resigning. Tommy Parker has stood down in order to become the chief executive of the new Auckland Light Rail Company. Mr Brown has called for the whole AT board to stand down. Those are the headlines on the traffic front in Wellington. There's heavy congestion on State Highway 1 at Tawa, north of the capital. Due to what Waka Kotahi is calling an incident on a local road, the northbound off-ramp at Tawa Interchange is closed. Motorists are asked to detour via Mungavan and expect delays. There are no other major issues to report at this stage. We'll have updated news headlines and any traffic updates for you around 20 to 6.
Thanks, Karen. World Rugby are hoping for a rush of last-minute ticket sales and a big walk-up crowd at tomorrow's World Cup semi-finals double-header at Eden Park. Despite the Black Ferns making the final four, around 25,000 tickets remain unsold on the eve of the double-header. Sports reporter Clay Wilson has been at Black Ferns training and joins us now from Eden Park. Kia ora, Clay. What's the situation with the ticket sales?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, well, World Rugby Tournament Director, Michelle Hooper, did confirm today that just under 20,000 tickets have been sold, with capacity here at Eden Park just over 40,000 for this game tomorrow. And it is surprising for a number of reasons, really. First of all, this is a double header. Not only are the Black Ferns playing France, but you have the other semi-final between England and Canada. You also look back to the opening weekend here of the tournament at Eden Park, and that sellout that the Black Ferns managed to pull in. There was 3 games, of course, but still a great crowd for that opening day. And also the crowds we've seen in Whangarei. The Black Ferns have, of course, played a couple of games there, and great scenes on the bank we saw there, very full crowds for those games, and also the low ticket prices. Organisers have made this tournament very affordable, so it's surprising in those senses to see that we haven't got more tickets snapped up. And I did ask Black Ferns co-captain Kennedy Simon about this today, and she did mention that there has been a lot of rugby played over the last 7 weeks, but she did promise that for those fans that did turn up tomorrow, that they would certainly it would certainly be worth their time. And New Zealand rugby boss Mark Robinson also spoke today, and he mentioned that the Black Ferns have played a very exciting brand of rugby, which is true, and also been very engaging off the field. So for those reasons, you'd have to think that it's definitely worthwhile to come along. And is also worth noting that Michelle Hooper did say that they're still on track to break the record attendance across the World Cup. They're sitting at around 90k at the moment and looking to get to around 120,000 fans attending this whole tournament.
Yeah, Clay, I just wondered, the weather's been a bit iffy in Auckland. If people are just biding their time to see if it's going to be a great night tomorrow, and then we'll flood in when it's, the sun is shining and there's no rain.
Beautiful here at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, looking at the Black Ferns match itself, what are we expecting?
Well, I think most people are predicting this to be a pretty close game, and really it comes back to an underlying couple of questions that have sort of been behind the Black Ferns throughout this tournament. And it all goes back to their end-of-year tour last year, where they went to France and England, played 2 games against each, and were well beaten in both those games. I think it's clear for everyone to see the Black Ferns have improved a lot in the last 6 months, and especially during this tournament. So we're going to find out tomorrow just how much they've closed the gap. Certainly, if they play their best rugby, you would think capable of beating this French team, but you go back to those games in France and the UK, a couple of 20-point losses. So how much have the Black Ferns closed the gap, I guess, is the question. And it's kind of an attack versus defence game, with the Black Ferns scoring 35 tries in their 4 games and France only conceding 2. So we'll find out tomorrow who's going to come out on top, with the winner pretty likely to face England, who are very heavily favoured to win the other semi-final against Canada here at Eden Park.
And Clay, an important game has just got underway for the Black Caps at the T20 World Cup across the ditch.
Yeah, so their final group game at this World Cup, and it is a pretty important one against Ireland. Pretty simple equation for the Black Caps. If they win this game, they will go through probably at the top of their pool, and that's based really on their big net run rate, which they accumulated mostly in that big win over Australia early on. If they don't win this game, then they're relying on either Australia later tonight or England tomorrow night to lose to still go through to the semis. But Black Caps pretty heavily favoured to win this game tonight, but also very wary of the fact that Ireland did upset England earlier in the tournament. But all going to form the remainder of these group matches. New Zealand looks set up to perhaps face South Africa in a semi-final in a few days' time. So a big, important game for the Black Caps to try and win and book their place in those semi-finals.
Hey, back to the rugby, Clay. I mean, no discussion with you the night before a game would be complete. If I didn't put you on the spot and ask what your predictions were going to be, would you like to give us one?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've got a good feeling around this Black Ferns team and the way they've built towards this semi-final, and just how much they've improved. And just watching them there at training today, so relaxed. They look like they're really embracing the occasion. So pretty happy to predict a close game, but a Black Ferns win in a spot in the final here next weekend.
Fantastic, Clay. Let's hope you're right. Clay Wilson there live from Eden Park on a fantastic looking evening weather-wise. Hopefully it'll stick for tomorrow as well. A call tonight for the government drug buying agency to extend its blanket funding of children's medications beyond cancer treatment. Under the current system, any medicine for paediatric cancer is automatically funded without a pharmac assessment. The agency is now reviewing the policy, saying it's an equity issue because it treats medication for adult cancers and other childhood illnesses differently. So advocacy group Patient Voice Aotearoa launched a petition calling on Pharmac to extend the policy rather than get rid of it. Spokesperson Malcolm Mulholland joins us now. Kia ora, Malcolm.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Can you just give us a bit of an explainer? What do you want them to do?
We basically want them to extend what's known as the 8.1b rule, which enables oncologists to prescribe paediatric patients any drug that they need in order to treat their cancer, and extend that to all children regardless of disease, so that it creates an equitable playing field rather than taking away drugs that are needed to treat children's cancer.
This is a really difficult conversation to have, right? Because basically it comes down to rationing, eh? So I'm just wondering, I understand what you're asking for, but do you think it's fair? Because everybody who has a family member who has cancer or any other serious illness or disease, they want them to have the best chance. What about 21-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 55-year-olds? They are not extended the same access to medications.
No, they're not. And ultimately, that's actually where we need to get to. But in order for that to happen, we need to drastically increase Pharmac's budget. We know, whether we base it on Pharmac's own numbers or the OECD average, we've got about a $1.6 billion hole. And I think what's really important for listeners to realise is that if we were able to fund Pharmac to that extent, that wouldn't enable Pharmac to buy every medicine in the world. That would simply bring us up to average, and that's how far behind we are right now.
In making this suggestion, Malcolm, do you accept that there's inconsistency in the way the system is currently working and that child cancer sufferers are treated as, well, essentially more deserving?
Yeah, I accept that there's definitely inequity at the moment, but I think, the first focus has been around children right across the board, as opposed to children with cancer and then adults with cancer. I think that's probably the first inequity that needs to be sorted. And what we're arguing is simply to bring everybody up, or all children, I should say, to a level playing field, and then turn our attention to adults who are affected by cancer or a rare disorder for that matter.
But isn't that again a fairness issue? Because some will ask, why should the children get priority? Why shouldn't everyone and all the medications be assessed against the same benchmarks, regardless of the age you are or the condition you are suffering from?
And again, I don't argue with that in the long term. Certainly that's the place where we need to get to, so that everybody, regardless of age or condition, is treated fairly in the system. The fact of the matter is, Pharmac has a budget that is not fit for purpose, and so that's what we're left to deal with, and that's why we have to have these very difficult conversations. If Pharmac was funded to the point where it needs to be, then we simply would not be having these debates. And in actual fact, if you look overseas, say to Australia or the UK, they don't have these provisions simply because they fund their drug buying agency appropriately.
How much do you think extending this policy to what you want it to be right now, which is all paediatric medications, right, not just for cancer, for other illnesses as well, what cost will that come at, do you think, Malcolm?
Well, I don't know is the honest answer, but then again, neither does Pharmac. And I would have imagined before Pharmac had pushed play on this consultation document, they actually would have been able to have crunched the numbers. At the moment, we have to go off what Pharmac are telling us, which in the past hasn't proven to be truthful. Often they'll quote a list price. It'll be an American list price. They don't quote what the list price would be here in New Zealand, and they also don't tell the public what the rebate scheme is generally as to what they receive. We don't actually imagine, look, it would be in the millions, absolutely. At the moment, the policy where, children who have cancer get the medicines they need is roughly about $1 million annually, so it's actually quite a small drop in the ocean.
But growing according to Pharmac, Malcolm, because of advancements in treatment and new drugs coming onto the market.
Yeah, and yet I think if we were to ask that question of Pharmac, they wouldn't be able to answer with any great certainty as to what that amount is. I mean, they came up with some BS figure, and I'm going to call it that, about $1 million to treat one patient. Well, I don't know of any child who's been treated with that kind of amount in mind. And again, we have to ask, how reliable are the figures that Pharmac are providing us? That's why it would be nice to have some economic forecasting, which is actually their responsibility.
Malcolm, we're almost out of time, but is there any evidence to suggest that this policy regarding paediatric cancer drugs has led to substantially better outcomes for children with the money spent?
Well, I know of children who have been able to access the medications that they need, and they are alive as a result of that today. Again, it's a question that needs to be put back on Pharmac, and I find it amazing that they have no measure in place or no record of how successful that funding regime has been. But I can only tell you, but having spoken to parents of children with cancer, that their child is still alive today because they were able to access the medications they needed through that scheme.
Thank you for talking to us this evening. That is Malcolm Mulholland, who's from Patient Voice Aotearoa. And apologies, because we're heading to the business news a little late this evening. It is, sort of-ish, 5:30, give or take a few minutes. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko taku hua in INA, ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins us in the studio to talk all things business. Let's start with Spark. The board's been challenged on the reasons behind selling part of its tower infrastructure to a Canadian investor. What's the concern?
Yeah, so this was announced before, but there was the annual meeting today. And annual meetings are an opportunity for shareholders to tell the boards what they think of the company's decisions over the past year. And in this case, Spark had sold their tower infrastructure. It's not the first time or the only time we've heard of telcos wanting to do that. It's infrastructure that they don't need to own. They want to own the technology and they want to invest in digital and that sort of thing. So they sold 70% of that business to the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan Board. It valued TowerCo at nearly $1.18 billion. So they got a pretty penny out of it and enough to invest in the things they wanted. So the chair of Spark, Justine Smythe, laid that out to the shareholders, but got some real pushback from at least, one that had been a longtime investor of the company saying, why on earth would you sell our infrastructure? That's ours. We don't need to sell it. And no, we don't need cash back. Spark intends to return $350 million to shareholders. And this fellow was saying, you don't need to do that. Take that money, put it in the company, that's where we want it to be.
Quickly, can you tell us what's going on with the UK economy that looks like it's in for, rough times for a while?
Leading into our dollar, I suppose it would be worthwhile to find out what some of the big central banks around the world are deciding to do. And in this case, the UK economy is not looking very well, and it's expected to be in for much tougher times, with inflation expected to peak at 11%. That's annual inflation. And maybe even higher, but definitely it's going to peak at that point and then maybe drop really quickly middle of next year once the energy crisis abates. Problem with that is that to counter that kind of inflation, you have to raise your interest rates. And the Bank of England raised their official rate, 75 basis points, and you have to expect that that's not going to be the end of it. The problem, again, and this is one of the things we heard the Reserve Bank Governor of New Zealand say, is it too much? Is it too little? It's how do you know what is the right place to land when it comes to interest rate hikes? There's a point where you could plunge the economy into a recession. That would be terrible amid high inflation. So it's a problem, international problem. We're seeing it with the U.S. Federal Reserve, that they're saying maybe rates need to go higher. Now with the Bank of England, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. We're going to hear from them later this month. But look, I can tell you one thing. It looks like everything's going up.
Skates on for the market.
Right. NZX Top 50 Index rose 0.4% today. That was a 46-point gain to 11,231. And part of that was a lift in Sky on the expectation of that big return of shareholder funds. Let's see. Kiwi is trading at 58 US cents. And that was after all these other currencies going their way. 91.7 Australian. That was partly because the Reserve Bank has also downgraded its economic outlook. And the British pence, 51.7.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier with Business News there. An Auckland mum fighting what she believes is a sexist school uniform policy around earrings is frustrated by the slow pace of change. That's despite guidelines from the Human Rights Commission saying schools could fall foul of the law if they treat students differently based on gender. Jane Matthews' son, who goes to Mount Albert Grammar, was told off for wearing an ear stud, even though girls at the school are allowed to wear them. So Jane approached the school in April and wrote to the Board of Trustees requesting a rule change. And Jane Matthews joins us now. Kia ora, Jane.
Kia ora, Lisa. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Tell us what the fundamental issue is here for you.
Two major things. There should be no differentiation for children based on sex. So if a girl's ear looks exactly like a boy's ear, which it does, you can't tell the difference, therefore there should be one rule throughout schools, because I think as students evolve at the moment, we've got students with different genders or identifying as various genders, and they should be able to just have one rule. There shouldn't be a differentiation based on sex. That's my first point. My second point is with the frustration over timing. If the school wanted to get in touch with me about something and needed an answer from me, I suspect they would be rather more pointy than I've been after 6 months if I hadn't answered them. So what I'm trying to achieve here is just to get a change that makes absolute sense. And the other thing that I have found recently, actually after the article came out yesterday, was this issue has been raised before with Mount Albert Grammar. In 2017, a group of students put a petition together because they believed it was sexist that the boys weren't able to wear an earring, and it wasn't successful. And I feel like it's time to revisit that.
Jane, what do you think the message that this policy is sending? If the girls are allowed to wear studs and the boys aren't, what message does that send to the children at school?
Well, that there basically is a difference, and I think the impression I got, and I have to say the principal was very reasonable with me when he spoke to me, but initially I think they allowed girls to wear earrings when they were a small minority in the school, and it was a concession made for the girls. But now actually the school, and for the last 20 years girls have been there, it is now a 50-50 split, and so it is basically an outdated policy. There is no reason boys, I believe male police officers or firemen or any other government employee, so long as it doesn't breach health and safety, is allowed to wear reasonable amounts of jewellery. I can't imagine that there is any health and safety issue with a boy wearing the same earring as a girl.
What was said to your son, and was he punished for wearing the earring?
Initially, he was going to be given a detention, and I went and spoke to them and said that I wasn't happy with that based on the fact that it was a sexist policy and that I didn't believe that was a reasonable punishment. And so the school paused that for the period of time to get an answer. So it has been paused over the last 6 months.
And so what have other parents or other students been saying to you since you've kind of gone public with this battle to get the uniform code changed?
I've actually had an amazing response from a whole bunch of families and parents whom I've never met. They have all said that they absolutely agree with the policy and have asked what they can do to help. And my suggestion to them was that they do what I did, which was write to the Board of Trustees and follow the school's process, because, I'm not interested in bypassing that process, but I am interested because to date I have done everything that the school has asked me to do in the order it has. But I just felt that 6 months is too long to get an answer for something that is really quite simple. It doesn't take a lot of administration from the school at all. The other option I gave them, of course, because I tried to be constructive, was to say if it needs to be consistent and nobody wears an earring, that's also an option. So if they wanted to remove that right from girls, they're absolutely welcome to do that as part of the uniform policy. And my other thought was that they design and have a Mag's earring that all of the students are able to wear. So I was trying to give some options there that they can look through, but discriminating against boys is no longer an option, in my opinion.
Jane, really good to talk to you. Thanks for your time. That is Jane Matthews, whose son goes to Mount Albert Grammar. She's trying to get the uniform code changed there. So if they let girls wear earrings, she says the boys should be allowed to as well, because at the moment she reckons the policy is sexist. It is almost 4:45. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai Ofakaro, let us know your thoughts on the uniform policy. Should both boys and girls be allowed to wear earrings? If the girls are, should the boys be allowed to? If not, why not? 2101 on text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. And the email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Sorry for the delay, but we're going to the headlines now. Ko Karen Arnold tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. The Fire and Emergency Chief Executive, Kerry Gregory, says the union's decision to call off today's strike action was a positive move. He says Fire and Emergency remains committed to exploring all the options available to reach settlement, and he's confident the new offer represents considerable progress. Air New Zealand's Chief Executive Greg Foran says the company's goal for its first carbon zero flight in 2026 is the right way forward for aviation. Today, the airline announced plans to replace its smallest regional fleet with 23 emissions-free aircraft by 2030. Air New Zealand is still deciding on what carbon-free model it uses to power the planes. Mr. Foran says the future of flying is changing. The former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, is recovering in hospital after being shot in the leg at a political rally. One person died and several were injured when a burst of gunfire hit Mr. Khan's vehicle in the eastern city of Wazirabad. His supporters took to the streets in several Pakistani cities after the attack. Police in Palmerston North are warning the public after veterinary drugs were stolen from a vehicle overnight on Wednesday. Pentobarbital is used to euthanise animals and can be life-threatening if taken by people. A police spokesperson asks that anyone who comes across drugs or medicine bottles to not touch them and contact police immediately. Those are the headlines. Looking at the traffic, in Wellington there's been congestion on State Highway 1 at Tawa, north of the capital, due to what Walker Kotahi called an incident on a local road. The northbound off-ramp at Tawa Interchange was closed for a time. It's now open again, but there will be delays. Motorists were detouring via Mungarvan. No other issues to report on the traffic front. We'll have more news at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. Let's get to some of your feedback now, and a ton of it coming in on the issues of earrings and whether it's sexist to only allow girls at school to wear them and not boys. This listener says, of course boys should be allowed to wear studs. What reason could you give that is not sexist for them not? Dorothea's got in touch and says, in this day and age of gender equality, boys should absolutely be allowed to wear ear studs and skirts if they want to. Another, everyone should be permitted earrings. Earrings don't belong to one sex or gender, all or nothing. When will people be seen simply for being people? On the other side of the coin, this person's got in touch to say earrings should only be worn by girls at a high school. Outside of school, no issues. It's the one last place where kids can see some idea of what is normal. Well, normal? Question mark. And on the subject of gun laws and waiting for your licence, this listener says, I applied for my licence last August and have been told I could be waiting till next March before I get it. Very annoying because I'm looking to get into conservation work, doing commercial hunting, and can't really do that till then. Another person says, my husband got his recently after waiting 18 months, plus a very lengthy interview, far more red tape than the previous one. Keep your feedback coming to 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Thieves have stolen vet drugs that could potentially kill a person just by getting it on their skin. Pentobarbital is used to euthanize animals, and police fear the people who have pinched it from a car in Palmerston North might think that they have something else. Acting Detective Senior Sergeant Dave Wilson is warning people if they come across discarded medical vials, do not touch them with your bare hands.
Pentobarbital or pentobarbital is a sedative drug commonly used to euthanize animals. It's 250 ml vials of this drug were stolen, and we're told that approximately 50 mils is what it takes to kill a cow. So there is a potential for people that have it don't know the risks surrounding it.
Do you think, I know you can't be sure, but do you think these thieves might be under the impression they've got something else, something useful as a recreational drug?
Potentially, and I must stress that this drug in particular can be ingested by skin contact and contact through bodily membranes. So the fact that they're simply touching this vial, they need to be very careful.
What can you tell us about the circumstances under which it was stolen?
So on the evening of the 2nd and morning of the 3rd of November, a vehicle was parked on a residential street in Palmerston North. The drugs itself were secured in the appropriate conditions inside the vehicle, and the vehicle was broken into on the roadway and the vial was stolen.
So do you think these people knew what they were doing? I mean, did they target this car?
Well, we certainly don't know. All we know is that there's no suggestion that it's anything apart from being opportunist, but we are concerned about these drugs being out in the public. Given
you're saying that even touching this could be risky, what are people looking for? What do these containers look like? Is there any markings on them?
So they're a small glass vial, approximately 250 mils glass vial medicine containers marked with pentobarbital. They look what people would commonly associate with the medical profession, but there is a possibility that the people that have these have removed the labels. So what we're saying is, to any person that has concerns or has come in contact with items that they're now unsure of, is to contact firstly health professionals and then ultimately the police. What we don't want is for people to pick these vials up, but we certainly want people to make them safe. So if they do need to pick them up to keep them away from children or to make them safe, then do so with appropriate precautions like gloves.
But generally speaking, do not touch these containers with your bare hands.
Absolutely. So if someone finds something that they are concerned about, is to call 111 immediately.
And what's your message to the thieves?
Our message to them is to do the right thing. Ultimately, make these items safe, contact the appropriate people, including police, so we can get them off the street.
And that's Acting Detective Senior Sergeant Dave Wilson. It is 8 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Residents in the Marlborough Sounds are worried about when they're going to get reconnected by road, if at all. Some roads got knocked out in the severe weather in August, and locals have taken their concerns to council staff at public meetings this week. The council says while many residents want certainty, it's not in a position to give it. Samantha G has more.
At the very end of Kinapuru Road, Hopewell Lodge co-owner Lindley Perkins says her workload has increased since the road closed and guests can no longer drive in. The postman collects and drops off her linen and groceries, and she spends more time working to keep bookings and organise boat transport for guests.
The water taxi subsidies are definitely our saviour for our business. It makes it very affordable to come in from Havelock. Our only concern would be how long will they last, and will they stay there in place until the road is actually open again to public?
Chrissy Sumby lives near Timahia Bay in Kinapuru Sound, and since the road recently reopened for residents, she's been able to travel to Havelock several times a week for work.
Because, most of us like to drive, we need to drive. We don't all have boat access. So, what we're doing at the moment is good, and they're getting rid of the dirt that's in the way, so you don't feel like you're squashing through it or you might slide off.
Kinapuru Road resident Stefan Schultz says residents are united in pushing for better access. The current restriction is a combined vehicle and trailer length of no more than 8 metres, but a ute and small trailer are longer than that, forcing people to break the rules.
The biggest hurt for the farming community obviously is the complete lack of possibility of bringing trucks in on the road currently, and from what we hear, that might be a reasonably long-term situation.
Recovery manager Dean Hefford says it's looking at all options for Kinapuru Road. That includes closing parts of it or reducing it to single-lane access.
There's everything from parts of the road being closed to all singing, all dancing, double-lane road and everything in between. But we don't know what the solution is yet, and that's why we need to go out to the community, ask them what their needs are, but also understand the costings and the issues of putting back in something that's affordable, resilient, and that we can maintain properly in the future.
More than $5 million has been allocated to improving access in Kinapuru Road in the short term. It's been estimated the road's repairs could cost $160 million.
Giving people safe, reliable access in the interim is our priority, and then going out to the communities and asking them what impacts different forms of roading access will have on their lives and businesses before we can go back to the government to seek as much funding as we can get from Marlborough to help us out, because any funding we don't get from Waka Kotahi and the government has to be met by local ratepayers.
Engineering consultants are investigating the roading network, with a full report and options for road repairs expected by mid-next year.
Samantha G reporting there. Kapiti Coast District Council is trying to get the community involved in a battle to get motorbikes off its dunes. The council has launched a new signage campaign to educate people about the impact of the vehicles can have on the dunes. Reporter Crystal Gibbons and cameraman Angus Drever went down to the beach to take a look.
The Kapiti Coast Beach stretches for 40 miles of sandy paradise. But churning up the sand and locals' tempers are motorbikes roaring through the sand dunes. There are bylaws banning motorbikes on the beach, but Jackie Muir from Kapiti District Council says they're getting ignored.
For years and years and years, we've had people that access the dunes off the beaches or other pathways and use motorbikes and off-road four-wheel drives and other motorised motor vehicles.
Among the most vulnerable creatures to the rubber tyres on the sand is the New Zealand dotterel. Waikanai Community Board member Michael Moore says the spotted birds nest in the Tohoro area annually.
They're not only rare, they're quite endangered and they're very fragile little animals, so to have vehicular access and motorbikes and disturbing them really does interrupt and interfere in their environment.
Andy McKay from the Kapiti Council says in the past the dotterel have been run over by vehicles.
They're incredibly hard to see. They're perfectly camouflaged for a beach environment. They tend to nest in little patches of driftwood or quite out in the open on the sand. So we're doing our best to look after those populations as well.
But it's not just the wildlife that can be impacted. Impacted dunes can also be a threat to nearby properties. In the face of climate change and rising sea levels, Andy McKay says they've got a planting program on the dunes to bind the sand.
But what happens is when we have vehicles in those areas, they tend to kill the plants off, and it means that then we get sand blowing through, you get blowouts, and then when you have these extreme weather events and big storms coming through, you don't have those dunes there to protect property and infrastructure and those environments that sit behind those 4 dune areas.
He says the dunes are Kapiti's first line of defence in big storm events. Kapiti Council is now running a sign campaign to educate the community on how the dunes can be impacted and hopefully curb their wheelie habit. Waikanai Ward Councillor Jocelyn Pravanov says it's important as the dunes are difficult to rebuild.
I suppose a lot of people who actually who use motorbikes and the people even walking through them don't actually see the endangered bird species we have here, as well as the lizards and some of the endangered plant species we have here as well. So we need to really do our best to try and maintain them.
And she's hoping the community will step in to help.
Right, let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6. Judith got in touch with a thoughtful email. She says, "Kia ora, Lisa. Every year we get asked for our feedback about fireworks, and every year it's pretty much the same. Every year I dutifully email in and tell you about my adult daughter who has an intellectual disability and is scared of fireworks to the point of vomiting. We talk about pets and the environment, but there are members of the community who are just plain scared shitless of them. They have the word fire in them, for goodness sake. Why wouldn't that be dangerous? In addition to that, as an English person by birth, I feel the weight of colonisation. Yet despite all the kōrero on this subject, Kiwis are still somehow prepared to celebrate something that happened centuries ago in another country and risk so much in the process. Let's add all of this up and make the right decision," says Judith. Thanks for taking the time to email us, Judith. Really appreciate it. On the subject of earrings, this listener says, "I totally agree with Jane. If the girls are allowed to wear earrings, then the boys should also be allowed to. It should be either everyone or no one, as Jane said. Otherwise, it is sexist." Others of you have different views on that one. Let me see if I can find another voice, maybe after 6.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Karen McCarthy. Hunters say a change to the law covering the renewal of firearms licences could not have come fast enough. The government is pushing through changes that mean that as long as a person applies to renew their licence while their current one is valid, they can continue shooting. But Grant Dodson from the Game Animal Council told Checkpoint that thousands of applications are already backed up.
In 1992, New Zealand ceased to have lifetime firearms licences and moved to a 10-year licence. So there was a whole lot of licensing done in 1992, relicensing every 10 years since, and it's not surprising that there's somewhat of a pile-up now.
Grant Dodson says the problem has been exacerbated by new firearms laws, which have slowed down licensing. The Internal Affairs Minister says it may be time to consider whether fireworks should continue to be available for public sale as the threat from wildfires continues to grow. Jan Tonetti says she was horrified to learn the blaze at Pegasus Bay in Canterbury was sparked by fireworks. She says their continued sale is a discussion the country needs to have, especially with climate change making a much bigger impact on wildfires. Meanwhile, the firefighters dealing with the Pegasus fire in Canterbury have it contained despite more windy weather. They say it could take another 3 days to extinguish the fire, which has burned through 200 hectares of pine forest and scrub along the coast. Crews will monitor the fire overnight, and firefighters and a helicopter will be back tomorrow working on hotspots. About a half a dozen opponents of the Mount Messenger bypass in North Taranaki remain camped on the side of State Highway 3 after a police operation to remove them failed. Marie Gibbs of the Putama Charitable Trust says protesters have been camped on the northern side of Mount Messenger for 3 days. She says there's been a massive police presence on the mountain today.
Police moved in just after 11 and they spent about 4 hours trying to trespass us. They arrived with paddy wagons, looked like about 80 cops.
Marie Gibbs says after a 4-hour standoff, the protesters moved to nearby Ngāti Tama land and the police left. No arrests were made. The group is protesting against permits Waka Kotahi has to remove or kill native species, including kiwi and Archie's frogs. In the Haitian capital, Port-au-Prince, police have reportedly exchanged heavy fire with a group of rival gangs at the country's main fuel terminal. Reports say security forces are trying to wrestle back control. Criminals have been blockading the petrol terminal for weeks, which has contributed to a spiralling humanitarian crisis on the ground. The elderly husband of the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has been discharged from hospital days after he was attacked at his house in San Francisco. Paul Pelosi, who is 82, remains under medical care at home. The BBC's David Willis reports.
Paul Pelosi underwent emergency surgery at a San Francisco hospital after being hit on the head with a hammer. Prosecutors allege the suspect in the case, 42-year-old Canadian David Dupape, forced his way into the home with the intention of kidnapping Nancy Pelosi. Her husband is now said to be home and resting, and in a statement, Ms. Pelosi expressed gratitude for what she called the life-saving treatment that he had received, adding that he remained under doctor's care as he continued what she called the long process of recovery.
The Marlborough District Council says it cannot give Kinaparu Road residents certainty about whether the road will be reinstated to what it was. It was the most severely damaged road in the Sounds network during the August storm. The council recovery manager, Dean Hefford, says more than $5 million has been allocated to improving access in Kinaparu Sound in the short term.
Giving people safe, reliable access in the interim is our priority, and then going out to the communities and asking them what impacts different forms of roading access will have on their lives and businesses before we can go back to the government to seek as much funding as we can get from Marlborough to help us out, because any funding we don't get from Waka Kotahi and the government has to be met by local ratepayers.
Engineering consultants are investigating the roading network with a full report and options for road repairs expected by mid-next year. It's 6:04. More than 20,000 tickets are still available for tomorrow's Rugby World Cup semi-finals at Eden Park, with just under half the stadium seats sold. The double-header will see Canada take on the highly favoured England on Saturday afternoon before the Black Ferns take on France at 7:30. Tournament director Michelle Hooper says it's a big crowd already for a semi-final, and she says the tournament is on track to meet the goal of having 120,000 people attend the Rugby World Cup tournament. And New Zealand is putting its hat in the ring to host the first Women's Lions tour in the next few years. NZ Rugby Chief Executive Mark Robinson says the home nations are talking to other nations about making the tour a reality.
We're signalling very strongly that we would love to be the host for that tour. Possibility of 3 test matches, anywhere from sort of 3 to 4 midweek games as well, right around the country, which, you know, when we think about this tournament, it's obviously been, you know, magnificent. We've had people come from all over the place to see us.
Mark Robinson says it would be good to build on the momentum of the Rugby World Cup. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our friendly vet answers your animal questions and we find out what's behind our cat's attitude. Finn Johansson joins us after 10 with a very special collection of new music. And Dan Slevin has The Shortcut, a handy guide to your weekend's binge watching. Join me after 7 for Nights with me, Charlotte Ryan, in for Karen Hay, here on RNZ National.
A network funded through New Zealand On Air. Back to Lisa Owen and Checkpoint after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mostly fine apart from isolated showers. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow afternoon with showers developing about the ranges. Horowhenua to Wellington, Wairarapa and Nelson. Fine but cloudy periods for Wellington and Wairarapa from tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, becoming cloudy with isolated showers tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, occasional showers, some briefly heavy, clearing to fine in the morning in Westland and tomorrow afternoon for Bulla. Otago, partly cloudy with isolated showers this afternoon and evening, mainly fine tomorrow. Fiordland and Southland, cloudy periods, showers retreating to the coast in the morning, westerly gales about the south coast and Stewart Island easing tonight. And the Chatham Islands, mainly fine but becoming cloudy tomorrow evening. It's 6:07.
Nā mihi, Karen. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Air New Zealand has released ambitious plans for emissions-free flying on all their smallest regional flights by 2030. The project will cost hundreds of millions of dollars, with aims for the first carbon zero flight to take off in 2026. Figures from MB show domestic aviation contributed 815,000 tonnes of carbon emissions last year. The airline is hoping to change that through hydrogen, electric or hybrid options. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Nick Monroe have the story.
Between 1990 and 2020, domestic aviation emitted an average of 1 million tonnes of carbon each year. International aviation emits 2.5 times that annually. That's a staggering 3.5 million tonnes of carbon emitted every year by the New Zealand aviation industry. Today, Air New Zealand announced what it says is its biggest challenge yet, the first emissions-free flight, planned for 4 years' time. CEO Greg Foran says the future of flying is changing.
We know this is a direction of travel, we know it's the right thing to do. This is a big challenge, not just for Air New Zealand, it's for airlines generally, but we want to be to the forefront of this. We think it's the right thing for us and we think it's the right thing for the country.
It's starting with the smallest regional planes, 23 Q300s, before expanding the emissions-free flights to longer-haul planes. General Manager of Fleet Strategy and Delivery Baden Smith explains they're still weighing up what option they'll choose to power flights.
Number one is pure battery electric, a bit like your Tesla, but operating a small aircraft. And there's some challenges with that, right? So you've got weight is a major problem with battery weight, and weight in aircraft is a major problem. Hydrogen, for example. Hydrogen is fantastic as a fuel because of the mass energy density, and in other words, the relationship between the amount of energy in the fuel and the weight of that fuel is actually even better than jet fuel today. And then the third technology is hybrids, really, and that's where we would either have hydrogen hybrids or battery electric hybrids.
He says customers can be rest assured safety standards will remain the same and there are no shortcuts. But he admits this will only be possible with the right infrastructure in place.
We can't do this alone. This is actually a New Zealand problem. In New Zealand, we can solve the technology in the way that it's flowing, but we need airlines to be working with airports, to be working with energy producers around the country and many others to ensure that this is a success.
Since 2016, Air New Zealand's provided customers with an option to offset their carbon emissions, with 75% of those funds supporting a nationwide tree planting project, Trees That Count. The airline says over the last financial year, the fund has passed $1 million, planting over 142,000 trees. The other 25% goes towards an overseas carbon credit scheme. Altogether, just over 59,000 tonnes of carbon emissions offset through the scheme over the last financial year. But only 6.9% of passengers are actually ticking the box. Acting Head of Sustainability Jenny Sullivan says the company is focused on paving the way forward.
To lean into gross emissions reduction, we don't want to really pass it on to our customers. We acknowledge that we need to address that, and that is, predominantly Air New Zealand's responsibility in partnership with all of our enabling stakeholders, like the government, like the airports, like the energy providers.
But an emissions-free aircraft may mean customers don't have a choice whether they foot the bill. Greg Foran says sustainable biofuels cost about 3 times as much as standard fuel.
You just can't assume that by putting sustainable aviation fuel in, the economics work for an airline. You actually wouldn't make any money. So what I mean by the customer incurring some cost is that initially we may see over a period of time an increase in prices.
A decision on what emissions-free option the airline chooses for the future fleet is expected in the next few months, with building and testing the aircraft set for the next 3 years. Based on the current emissions data, time will tell whether the goal is ambitious or simply blue sky thinking.
Meanwhile, frustrated travellers have had flights delayed or cancelled at Auckland Airport, with some missing out completely on getting where they want to be. Our reporter Jonty Dine headed to the airport to speak to travellers about what the delays and cancellations have meant for them.
Back-to-back flights cancelled. I've been travelling all around the world, back a month. First time I travel in New Zealand, back-to-back flights cancelled. I mean, I don't know what Greg Foran and the Mary team and Air New Zealand are up to, but it's pretty disappointing. It's piss poor.
It's 2 years ago I actually booked this flight, and then COVID's delayed it, and this is the...
So far?
One cancelled and the second one's cancelled,
Well, we left Tauranga at 3 o'clock this morning to beat the Auckland traffic and get set to catch a flight at 10 o'clock, and that flight was delayed through mechanical problems, but they put us onto another flight that was due to leave at about the same time. That's been delayed for mechanical problems, so now we've got to go back to counter 1 where the queue's 100 miles long and see how we can get to Queenstown.
Must be pretty frustrating, especially travelling with young ones.
Well, there's a group of 6 of us and there's a family reunion down there, so it's all supposed to be happening today.
This is our third change. Our first flight was a mechanical issue, and then we were put on another flight and we've just been unloaded, but yeah, they can't help.
Right.
It's okay. Yeah. We'd rather be here than worrying about it up in the middle of the flight.
We were supposed to be going down to Queenstown. Our first flight was cancelled and now our second flight's been cancelled. So now we're trying to get one for tomorrow, hopefully.
It just is what it is.
Yeah.
And there's no point getting angry about it because it's the staff who get it. So we'll make do with the situation. Yeah.
We might have to get to the bar if need be.
Well, we had one cancellation originally, and we were able to jump up to another plane and they fit us in, but then we got to the airplane, disembarked, went to go take off, and they said that they had a computer problem. So we had to come back to the gate, and now we're in this line trying to reschedule again.
One Auckland to Christchurch flight was cancelled yesterday and some passengers are unable to get on a flight until Saturday. Air New Zealand says there are high loads at the moment and it's provided accommodation options when necessary for customers. The airline says a handful of flights have been cancelled today due to engineering requirements, and all customers have been re-accommodated on to same-day services. We asked how many flights have been cancelled, and Air New Zealand says they can't tell us because the information is commercially sensitive. With the US midterms just days away, the President and ex-President are on a rallying blitz trying to whip up support for their Senate and congressional candidates. Joe Biden's on the road in New Mexico and Donald Trump's on his way to Iowa with an eye on his old job. CNN's Jeff Zeleny reports.
To say Donald Trump is coming back to the campaign trail would suggest he's ever gone away.
Make America great again.
But starting tonight, he's back in a new way. 4 rallies in 5 days, in a sprint to Election Day.
Hello, Iowa.
Iowa is hardly the hottest spot on the map of 2022 battlegrounds, but the state has something even more enticing. It hopes to ring the opening bell of the next Republican presidential race. As Republicans ride a wave of optimism in the final days of the midterm elections, the 2024 campaign is about to burst from the shadows, and the former president is eager to solidify his role as the party's top leader, inching ever closer to announcing another bid for the White House.
In order to make our country successful, safe, and glorious again, I will probably have to do it again.
The question is whether potential rivals would join him or step aside. A parade of Republicans with presidential ambitions have already visited Iowa this year, including former Vice President Mike Pence, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Senators Tim Scott of South Carolina, Rick Scott of Florida, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, Ted Cruz of Texas, and outgoing Maryland Governor Larry Hogan.
Aren't you glad you live in the free state of Florida?
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is eyeing an Iowa trip of his own after his re-election campaign is complete, CNN has learned, further fueling an intensifying duel with the former president. While his loyal base of supporters is already lining up behind him, a Trump candidacy would test the full party's appetite for reliving the 2020 campaign and litigating a string of his legal challenges. Susan Stewart is an Iowa Republican who voted for Trump.
There are Republicans who never supported him in the first place. There are others who have mixed feelings about him. But by and large, I would say there's more diehard Trump supporters in any of those other categories.
Conversations with Republicans in other states reveal a measure of hesitation.
I am perplexed
because I was a Trump supporter, and I don't know where I stand now.
I feel like we got betrayed, and especially when you attack the white, you don't attack the Capitol, that's for sure.
So you wouldn't want to see him run again?
Oh, definitely not.
But many Trump loyalists do, and the former president has repeatedly signaled he's poised to launch a new campaign built around false questions about the last one.
May just have to do it again. Stay tuned, everybody. Stay tuned.
In Ukraine, there are fears a retreat from the city of Kherson might be a trick by Russia. Reports say checkpoints have gone and the Russian flag is no longer flying. CNN's Nick Robertson reports.
Atop Kherson's main government building, a change. No Russian flag. On a bus nearby, residents cheer, realising a Russian checkpoint is gone. A city resident whom CNN is not identifying for their own security describes the changes. Almost no large armoured vehicles in the city during the day, he says, and all the military checkpoints in the city are gone. The region's Russian-installed governor told a Russian media propagandist Russian troops are holding the city for now, but added most likely our troops will leave for the East Bank. What Russia is planning, not clear. Ukrainian officials fear deception.
We see it and realise that these may be certain tricks, military manoeuvres to build correct defences as they see it. Nevertheless, we see that in Kherson there are still regular units wearing civilian clothes.
But Ukraine still claiming gains. Thursday destroying several boats in Kherson port. And Wednesday destroying a Russian surface-to-air missile system, often used to hit Ukrainian civilians in nearby Mykolaiv. In the Black Sea too, Russia appears on the back foot as grain shipments resumed following Putin's reversal of his refusal this past weekend to cooperate with the UN brokered deal, citing new guarantees from Ukraine.
Russia reserves the right to withdraw from these agreements if these guarantees are breached by Ukraine.
Another sign, according to Ukraine's president, that Putin is being forced to change.
252 days ago, Russia demanded security guarantees from the United States of America. After 8 months of the Russian so-called special operation, the Kremlin is demanding security guarantees from Ukraine.
In Kherson, Putin's intent still far from clear. Residents report plenty of Russian heavy weapons on the edge of the city.
In Pakistan, investigations continue into the shooting of politician Imran Khan. The ousted Prime Minister was wounded in the leg at a march in a small eastern city. Mr Khan said to be in a stable situation in hospital. One person died in the shooting, several were wounded. The BBC's Samira Hussain reports.
Thursday's protest march started like all the others, and then this happened. Footage shared on social media, confirmed by the BBC, shows a conscious Imran Khan with a bandage on his right leg being taken to hospital. Here you can see a man with a gun. He was eventually caught. In a leaked video of his statement to police, he said he wanted to kill Mr. Khan. The current Prime Minister condemned the attack and has called for an investigation. Pakistan's president is calling it an assassination attempt. But leaders from Mr. Khan's political party released a statement on his behalf, accusing the country's Prime Minister, Home Minister and Director of Pakistan's powerful intelligence agency of being behind the attack, saying they must be removed from office. Just 2 days ago, we were with the former Prime Minister at one of his protest rallies, where he says the government is against him.
I'm a Democrat. Democrats always go to the people. At the moment, the establishment is against us. The entire political parties, all of them are against us.
He accuses the current government of a conspiracy that led to his ousting back in April. Since losing his position as Prime Minister, his popularity has grown. And it's why he's pushing for fresh elections. He believes he can win.
I've been in politics for 26 years. Never in Pakistan's history has a party had so much public support as now. And all along this route, you will see it's never happened in Pakistan.
These demonstrations are a pressure tactic by Mr. Khan's party to force the government to call an election, a cry the government has repeatedly said it would not heed. As news spread of the attack, so too did protests in several cities around the country. The apparent attempt to silence Mr. Khan may only serve to give fresh momentum to his campaign.
It is 23 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Black Panther's back. The sequel to the Oscar-winning film has had its European premiere in London. It's a tribute to original lead actor Chadwick Boseman, who died from colon cancer in 2020. The BBC's Stefan Powell reports from the black carpet in Leicester Square.
You can really feel, you can probably hear it as well, the energy and the excitement here about the finally returning to the screen 4 years after the last one.
I am queen of the most powerful nation in the world!
Black Panther is back on the silver screen, but there's also a sense of sadness and mourning a bit at the loss of Chadwick Boseman. It's something I was speaking to one of the stars of Black Panther Wakanda Forever about earlier on, Michaela Cole.
Yeah, it's still needed. Basically, the feeling it gives me as a woman of colour to see my story reflected back still gives me a rush of exhilaration to be seen. So I have a feeling we could do with more and more.
And like you were hearing there from Michaela, this is an important film for the Marvel studio because it speaks to an audience that other superhero films don't do. And that was the legacy of Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther, and that's what they're hoping to do with this movie. Remember, but also move on, kick on for another 10 years of this franchise connecting with audiences that many films simply cannot do.
Many of us love to wake up and smell the coffee, whether it's the espresso machine, stovetop or taking the plunge. Some coffee connoisseurs even roast their own beans. No one's crazy enough to deep fry their coffee, until now. CNN's Jenny Moose reports.
You do it to chicken, you do it to fries, but why would anyone do it to coffee beans? Deep fried?
All right, good luck, little coffee. Ooh, I thought there'd be more fizz.
James Hoffman is a coffee geek, author of books like The World Atlas of Coffee. He didn't expect deep-fried coffee would be
good to the last drop.
James was happy with a steady drip of progress.
Ooh, going brown. We're going brown.
At 10 minutes in, he didn't know if the beans were fried enough.
There's not a large body of literature there yet.
But after a total fry time of 14.5 minutes...
We're not looking too greasy.
Even when he got up close and personal, this guy is a true coffee fan.
There's something kind of weird about the fact that holding a fan over some freshly deep-fried coffee doesn't feel that weird to me.
Grinding the deep-fried coffee beans seemed normal, so was the filtering process.
The colour's looking okay. It's looking like we made coffee.
And finally, the moment of truth.
That's good? It's weirdly good.
Not so good was when he tried to make espresso using the deep-fried beans.
That's disgusting.
At least he blames the beans and not, like the guys in the old Folgers commercials, the wife.
Yes, honey, your coffee's undrinkable. But if you could do one thing for me.
What?
Try to do something about your coffee.
This coffee is criminal. Honey, you killed the petunias.
At least no petunias were harmed in the testing of deep-fried coffee.
It's not greasy, it's sort of soft and almost buttery, but not yucky and fatty and not too gassy, I would say. A little gas.
I feel a checkpoint experiment coming on. Have you seen a dragon in Wellington? No, not the one at the airport, much smaller. Tiny clay dragons have been spotted around the capital for those with a keen eye and a mind for geography. But how did they get there? Visual journalist Samuel Rillstone went to find out.
Dragons in our capital city, hidden from sight, unless you have a good eye for them. Buffy Nichols is the creator of these small dragons made from polymer clay. For over 2 years, she's been making and hiding dragons in multiple locations across Wellington City, Upper Hutt and Lower Hutt. She then posts a photo and a small description in the R Wellington subreddit and leaves her creation for its new owner to find.
One day I had made one and I was just in town and I just hid it and posted on a daily Wellington Reddit thread saying, you know, hey, if you find it, you can have it. And there was an enthusiastic response and I was like, hey, that's pretty fun. I think I'll try that again.
Buffy has a background in the creative arts, previously working in a doll factory. So why dragons?
People really like them and they're kind of magical and they really lend themselves to the kind of art that I like to do, which is like sort of brightly colored and cute. And they're not technically particularly complicated. Like this one was one that I fell in love with. If you look closely at it, it's just a bunch of cones carefully shaped into a dragon.
Today, she's making what she's dubbed a night dragon. She begins by squeezing and rolling the clay.
And this is called conditioning the clay, which basically means smushing it around so that it behaves itself.
Soon, a long tentacle-like piece forms the beginnings of the body of the dragon. After sculpting the head and snout, Buffy picks some eyes from her large collection. Then it's time to add a bit of flair.
This dragon is going to have some glow-in-the-dark highlights.
The horns, belly and tail are all made from the glow-in-the-dark clay. Buffy then adds small gem-like beads to the head and tail before attaching some feet. Next comes the wings. Rolling out separate pieces of clay, Buffy configures them on a piece of paper before folding it over the clay and pressing it flat using a coaster. 45 minutes from design to completion, the dragon is ready for the oven. 15 minutes later, the night dragon is ready for its game of hide and seek. Buffy heads off to a nearby park to find the perfect hiding spot and creates a post to notify her followers. She says she's glad she has a hobby that makes other people happy, and she's often sent messages of positivity.
A guy who found one, and he'd apparently been having quite a bad time with the medical diagnosis of his child and some other stuff, and then he found a dragon, and he wrote me this very nice message, and I was like, oh. For a little while, I wasn't putting any up, and it wasn't about anything in particular. I just had gone on a brief holiday overseas, and somebody messaged me going, look, if you don't want to do this anymore, I understand, but... And I was like, oh.
So the next time you're out and about in Wellington, keep an eye out. You might find yourself stumbling into a dragon's lair.
They are so cute. Check out that story online. Thank you for joining us. The Late News team keep you updated. Catch you next week.
Lines at 6:30. Hunters say a change to the law covering the renewal of gun licences could not have come fast enough. Firefighters have issued further strike notices just hours after calling off today's industrial action. Air New Zealand has announced plans to replace its smallest regional fleet with 23 emissions-free aircraft by 2030. And a retailers group says the popularity of fireworks is continuing to decline because of higher prices and a less spectacular range. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather at 7 o'clock.
Country Life pours you a cupful of rural New Zealand every week.
Working dogs, they love some pets. No. So Mary's the ideas man. One day he just came along and said, why don't we try and make jerseys with our wool?
Look, we look for a dark eye and a good back end, good scrotal size for holding the goods.
25 years and still going strong. Country Life, Friday at 7 during nights, Saturday morning at 7, and wherever you get your podcasts.
RNZ National, on air, online and on demand. It's time now for the detail. What is the deal with nuclear power? New Zealanders have been proudly nuclear-free for decades, but do we really know what nuclear power involves?
Kia ora, I'm Emile Donovan, and a few months ago, I did a podcast about New Zealand's goal to get to 100% renewable electricity generation. And the long and the short of it was noble goal, and we're pretty well placed to do it, but for the foreseeable, we're still going to have to burn some coal and some oil for the quick sugar hits of energy we need when the wind isn't blowing and the dams are running dry. And the reaction to that podcast was interesting. Lots of the correspondence I got wasn't actually about renewables or fossil fuels. It was about nuclear power. Why doesn't New Zealand go nuclear? After all, nuclear power is clean, right? Even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says so.
That's why they recommended in their most recent report that achieving deep cuts in emissions is going to require a more intensive use of renewables, nuclear, and carbon capture and storage.
Nuclear power is cheap. Once you've got a reactor up and running, it's reliable. The fuel that you burn is kind of plentiful. There's enough to last us a century or so. And once again, it's clean. An operational nuclear power plant produces almost no greenhouse gas emissions. But there is a problem. A few problems.
Frank, it was an accident at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, which is located on an island in the Susquehanna River, 10 miles from Harrisburg.
One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died.
This is as far as you can go before entering the exclusion zone surrounding the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Inside, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, is struggling to contain the ongoing nuclear disaster.
So today on The Detail, we're looking at nuclear power. What it is, how it works, whether it is safe, and how we should view it as humanity transitions away from fossil fuels. Dr. David Krofchek is a nuclear physicist at the University of Auckland. I began by asking him if he really actually is a nuclear physicist.
Yes, I am a nuclear physicist, although that has evolved from traditional low-energy nuclear physics to the fundamental research we do at high energies at the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland.
Yeah. What does a nuclear physicist do?
Nuclear physicist studies the fundamental atomic nuclei. So you think of chemistry, you have electrons spinning from around the outside. And the inside, you have things from your old chemistry in high school science class, protons and neutrons. But there's a whole universe of things inside protons and neutrons that existed in the first milliseconds, microseconds, millionths of a second of the early universe. And we study the physics of these quarks and gluons, these new names for these substructure of protons and neutrons. It's a purely basic research project of how the universe works.
I love this about physics. It introduces you to a whole new vocabulary of funny-sounding words.
Where do these names come from? And they're gluons, because they glue the quarks together. That's the reason they're gluons.
There's a logic to it. What's nuclear power?
Nuclear power is the energy that can come in two different ways from the atomic nucleus. You can have light nuclei and stick them together, that's nuclear fusion, or you can have a heavy nucleus like uranium, which is what most people will think of when they think of the word nuclear power. That can be encouraged to split into two lighter pieces, and it releases a fair amount of energy of motion of some of the particles that come off. And it's that energy of motion which heats up water, which then boils, which then makes steam, which then turns a turbine, which then makes electricity from a generator.
Okay.
Nuclear power is just an incredibly sophisticated way to boil water. That's what I tell my students, and I will stand by that.
Yeah.
You've got yourself a nuclear reactor here. It's kind of like a kettle, except the water's not heated by electricity, it's heated by nuclear fuel rods. Boiling water produces steam. The steam comes down a pipe, and there it impacts on a turbine, which is essentially a bunch of spoons on a spindle. That produces electricity, and hey presto, you've got yourself a happy town.
When did we first learn how to harness using these materials, these radioactive materials, to create power?
This was not the original goal. This was back in the 1940s when World War II was raging and it wasn't certain which way things were going. And in Chicago, a fellow named Enrico Fermi, who's up on the literature of the time, recognized that there was a possibility that someone had discovered that heavy elements could somehow be split into lighter elements, and people saw this as a possible source of energy.
Finally, Fermi, to most everybody's relief, I guess you'd say, said, okay, zip in. I don't know where that term ever came. And George put the control rod all the way back in, and everybody cheered. The whole gallery was filled with people. And I guess it was Wegener brought out a bottle of Chianti. Everybody had a little sip.
And what do you think of when you're in a world war? You think of weapon. So the original purpose was for creating a bomb. And we all know the history now of an atomic bomb development. And since that time and after the war, the use of reactors, as they became known, became the atoms for peace, as Eisenhower once put it. And the idea was that we could get limitless energy too inexpensive to even count the price. And that was the heady days of the early 1950s.
When optimism reigned,
yes,
exactly.
Yes.
So what do you need to create nuclear power?
We'll concentrate on nuclear fission here, because that's what's happening, even though nuclear fusion is also being studied. You need a source of heavy nuclei. Historically, we have found uranium to be a good source. It's not the only source. There's another element called thorium, but that was bypassed. So you get uranium ore from Australia or Canada. Soviet Union at the time was the Soviet Union got theirs from, I think, Kazakhstan, which is like the biggest.
That's the place for
that's
uranium.
That's the place to get. But if you're in our world, it's Canada and Australia. And in fact, Canada will extract the ore, turn it into an oxide, a powder, yellowish powder, and it will actually ship through Auckland in barrels.
Really?
It's been doing this for 30 years or 35 years, yes. And it's no more radioactive than the rock that they took it out of.
Wow.
And then we'll ship it to the United States or anywhere else that then does further chemical processing and enrich that uranium.
Is that what you mean by enrichment?
And this is what gets enriched before you can make it into uranium pellets, which are then inserted into fuel rods. Fuel rods are then assembled into a big square inside the reactor chamber, and that's the start. So what you really need are those heavy nuclei, uranium, an enrichment process to enrich the uranium that likes to fission, and then you need billions of dollars to build the plant.
What are the benefits of nuclear energy as compared to other types of energy generation?
I think once the problem of building the plant is overcome and you're through this period, 10-year period and multi-billion-dollar cost of building the plant, the best part about nuclear power is that it's consistent and it's reliable. And that's why people often choose to use this as a baseline instead of, say, burning coal and turning on another coal plant. I remember terrible winters in Chicago back in the States where all the other power plants were out except the one nuclear power plant which powered the entire city through the entire January and February.
I've heard it said that nuclear power is pretty much zero emissions, and that being another positive contrast to, for example, using fossil fuels to generate energy. Is that true, or is that gilding the lily a wee bit?
Well, that's essentially true once you're in the running period.
Right.
Because there's a huge CO2 cost in concrete.
Right.
Building this gadget in the first place. And there's an enormous mountain of carbon dioxide that must be overcome. But as I look at the data, the CO2 per unit energy delivered, you come down over the years. The longer the plant is alive, that number gets smaller. So you're almost at an advantage compared to some of these other renewable energies for the total CO2 delivered over the lifetime of the plant.
So there's maybe a way to think about it is it has high upfront costs, both monetary and in terms of your carbon emissions.
Absolutely.
But once it's there, and that's a big once it's there, but once it's there, it has very low running costs in terms of emissions.
That's right. In terms of emissions, it has very low running costs.
So if the benefits of nuclear energy are that it's extremely reliable, that it's relatively cheap once upfront costs have been met, and that the emissions relative to burning fossil fuels are extremely low, again, once upfront costs to the environment have been accounted for, what are the drawbacks of nuclear power?
Boy, it depends on where you live. I should say, for my home in the States, it really is a financial cost, and fewer people worry about perhaps what they should be worrying about, the secondary uses of the enriched uranium, because that enriched uranium, once you get it to the power plant value of 6 or 7%, then you have the next highest enrichment level, which is weapons enrichment, which goes at 20, 21, 25%. You get a bigger blast. And there are military interests in keeping that kind of supply alive.
So is it the idea that, like, the thing that you use as fuel also has a potential application as a destructive weapon, and because there is a straight line between those two things, there is always a lingering threat in the background of nuclear power that it might be used for destructive purposes sometime in the future?
That's what bothers me the most.
Right.
It's not so much where do we store